BeTheTalk, episode 330, featuring Bonnie Hagemann. Welcome to BeTheTalk. We go behind the talk 7 days a week for tips and techniques to help you change the world. I'm Nathan Eckel, and a talker myself. I'm interviewing others who change the world with their talk. You can too, even if you've never given a talk before. Let's get started with today's show. We are live with Bonnie Hagemann. Bonnie, are you ready to talk?
I'm ready. Thank you for having me on the show, Nathan.
Bonnie Hagemann is the CEO of Executive Development Associates, a boutique consulting firm specializing in top-of-the-house executive development and growing high potentials into senior leaders. Bonnie has over 15 years of experience successfully leading organizations through times of rapid growth, acquisition, economic downturn, and downsizing. Bonnie Hagemann, welcome to the talk.
Thank you very much.
Your talk is called Waiting for the Fog to Lift. I love the allusion to the fog of war. I love the allusion to VUCA, which I've actually discussed with some other guests, that acronym standing for the conditions of a war-like environment, volatile, uncertain, changing, and ambiguous. And I love that you overcame that with your acronym CLEAR, which stands for change, listen, empower, anticipate, and reinvent. And I love that you have that story about growing up on the farm with your father. The hailstorm or the blizzard or whatever it was came in, ruined your crop. You're watching the tears coming down. Now, farmers don't cry. I grew up.
That's right.
Farmers don't cry, Talk Universe. I grew up in rural Pennsylvania. They don't cry, but your father cried. And then the next day he thought of a way to salvage that crop. So Bonnie, welcome to the talk.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, that story was interesting how it came about with the TED Talk.
Yeah, well, and you got the acronyms, you've got the powerful stories, you've got the, just the persona for all of that. So, I mean, can we just kind of dig behind that story? Because it's such a great emotional. I kind of stole your thunder a little bit. I wanted to go behind the talk, quickly summarize. But what's it like for you? You were a little girl at the time. You're watching the center of your universe, I'm assuming, just do something he's very seldom do, crying. You understood the crop was ruined, but then you saw him retool and come up with a solution that actually worked the next day. Please take us to that moment, and then also can we tie it back into how that helps you turn organizations and executives around in your current day, Bonnie?
Sure. Well, what happened was I was actually in college, so probably a little girl mentally.
A little older than that.
So,
okay.
A little older. I was a sophomore in college, and I went to school at a state school that was about an hour from where I grew up because we couldn't go away. We had to go home on the farm and work on the farm weekends and on the summer. And so it was my sophomore year, and I was home for the summer. And I was staying with my dad, and we were in Elk City, Oklahoma. And I don't know if you've been to Oklahoma, but those who have know that the wind can be terrible there. So, everybody hears about our tornadoes, but we actually have some really strong straight winds there. Now, I don't live there now. I live in Kansas City, but the wind can be really bad. And that's what had happened that night. We were in the house, after dinner, sitting around, and the wind started blowing. And we had put a crop in about 3 days before. So as we're sitting there, the wind became stronger and stronger until we heard, it coming. We could hear the trees were starting to crack a little bit. We could hear it against the side of the house. And we didn't really say anything that night, but we would just look at each other. So if you've seen my TED Talk, you know this, but we would just kind of catch each other's eyes and would think, this is not good, because the farm was about 20 minutes away. And we knew that if we had to go out there, if it was as bad there as it was in town, then we were in trouble. And so the next morning, as I said on the TED Talk, we go out. It was me and my dad. We go out. We pull out to the side of the field, and we get out and walk around, and we can see that the farm is the land. The crop is gone. And so that meant a lot for us. That meant that we didn't have the money to pay back the bank because we had taken out a loan to put in the crop, which we did every year. This was a vicious cycle. And we also didn't have the profit to live on. So, that's when I saw the tears rolling down my dad's face. And of course, they're rolling down my face because he's a tough old boot. And, that doesn't happen. I think I've seen him cry twice. And so he passed a couple of years ago. But, at that point, I had seen him cry 2 times in my life when I was in college. And that was one of them. So, I was devastated. The rest of the day we were sad. We didn't really talk. We worked because that's what farmers do. But I was truly devastated. And that night, it was quiet at dinner. I went to bed, still devastated, felt like I had an elephant on my chest. I get up the next morning, still devastated. But my dad is not devastated when I go in for breakfast. And he was like writing on a piece of paper. He was excited. And I, was confused. I thought, what are you doing? And he said, well, I think I found a way to put the next crop in. And I went and I looked at the paper and he started telling me what we were going to do to put the crop in. And, when I teach this, I teach a program called Leading with Vision. I always say, what changed? What really changed? Nothing really changed from the night before to that morning, except he had a vision to get us through this chaos. And he gave us hope. And that's what we needed. Then we just went to work and we made it happen. And so the analogy is when my life's work is all about developing leaders. Like I grow leaders, and it doesn't matter if they're the teenagers across my kitchen table or the executive in the C-suite. That's what I do. And what I say is people need leadership. And when there's a lot of chaos, like the VUCA environment that you were talking about, that's chaos. That's the fog that we're living in. Then we need leaders who will put a beacon out in the distance and say, see that light? We're going to go to that light. And I know how to get there. Just follow me. Now, they may not really know how to get there, but if they have an idea and they can rally everyone around that together, they can get there.
Bonnie, I want to tie this into some of the pieces in your bio because you really specialize in not just the acquisitions and the rapid growth and when times are good, but you're helping people when they're being downsized, when there's economic downturns, when there are disturbances out there in the force. We've been enjoying unbelievable economic growth in this country for really the last couple of years, pretty rapidly. Yesterday, or maybe it was the day before, was a little bit of a ripple out there with General Motors at the time of this recording and possibly closing some plants. So we've been almost immune to some of this news, but we're hearing it a little bit again. What's your advice to people, whether times are good? Companies are merging and they're still laying off and they're still doing this to increase their profit share and the revenues and, their returns and whatnot. So, take us back to, almost really losing the crop, but your father's persistence, determination, and then what you saw and what you're doing, how that spirit is living on today. Can you give us a couple of examples or case studies of some real turnarounds that you're working with right now?
Well, let me tell you about my own turnaround. So running consulting firms that are in the leadership development space, when you have economic downturn, you're going to feel some pain. So everyone in my industry felt a lot of pain with some of our largest organizations having to lay off as much as 70% of their workforce. Now, I had a boutique consulting firm, but we went completely upside down because I had just completed an acquisition in 2007, and then the 2008 crisis came. And so, we've got debt from the acquisition, and then all of a sudden, all this business is just dropping like flies. And so there was a day I remember being on my face, ready to quit. And I tears, it was just me. I was by myself, but I was just down on my face thinking, I can't get up. Like, I can't go on. And it was funny because my kids were a little younger then. They're 21 and 16 now. But I did get up, of course, in a little bit after I stopped feeling sorry for myself, having a pity party. And I got up and I thought, that's funny. The sun's still shining and the kids still need dinner. And I think it's going to be okay. You know, so it was just the realization like, yeah, yes, it's painful and all of that, but everybody's alive. Everybody's going to have dinner. It's going to be okay.
Now, can I throw in just kind of a hindsight perspective? Have you found in hindsight, Bonnie, that was actually a really good time to expand or acquire just because of the talent being less costly, less willing to be recruited somewhere else? Is there a flip side to the coin in hindsight or a little different for you?
Well, it would have been. So if I had tried to do the acquisition in 2009, that would have been a great time to do that.
Oh, so it was so you so bought high and sold low.
Exactly. So that wasn't such a great time. But to talk about the leading through the leading through chaos part. So I have this incredible advisory board. And at the time, I went to see one of my advisory board members who was, he was in his almost about 70 years old. His name was Dr. Jerry Davis. He was a dean at the Senior Service College in Huntsville, Alabama. And I flew to see him. And, he's just wise. He'd been through a lot. And I told him what was going on, thought I might have to close it down. And he said, look at me, Bonnie. You're going to make it through this. And, he said, just keep your head down, keep your company up. You are going to make it through. And again, nothing changed. Except he gave me hope. And so that, that's what I teach the leaders is, give people hope, show them there is a way through this and that you're willing to take the hard steps to get through it.
I think Napoleon found the same thing to be true, that everyone needs hope and that men will die for medals. Men will die for ribbons. It's amazing what inspires the human spirit. Really, what's next for you? I mean, you're doing all of this stuff with your firm. You're developing leaders. Are you continuing to do more of the same, or are there some new initiatives that you have on the stove?
Oh, I always have new initiatives, but the company itself continues to do top of the house executive development. I personally have, started coaching leaders, at the bottom of the company, and now I'm working up at the C-suite and with the boards, and that's my favorite work of all is working with the C-suite. I like the one-on-one better than anything else. So a lot of what I do is just to have the opportunity to do that. So I'm doing more of that. But every 2 to 3 years since the early 80s, Executive Development Associates has done this trends in the executive development research. And companies all around the world contribute, and then they use it as a benchmark when we publish the report. So I'm working right now on the new one with my co-authors, and it will come out in January. And so for the next 2 or 3 years, we will be talking about those trends. And so just to give you a little sneak peek, one of the trends that we're going to be talking about is the fact that VUCA is now like the new normal. It is table stakes. It is not, the fog isn't going to lift. This is what we live in. And we need leaders who we've all sort of, in trying to adjust, we've added more and more stuff. And so we've added, I got to do technology and innovation. And yet I still am running my normal operations. And so what we see as we really analyze the data is it's time for leaders to take a long, slow look down, slow it down for a minute and think, what does all of this mean? Are we really making the right decisions? And start cutting the things that are not the right decisions, because we can't just keep adding and think we're going to be able to handle that.
I got to ask you this next question. I mean, we talk about leadership, and then they've got that dichotomy of management versus leadership and all of that. What's your read? What's your vibe on management? Because is there such a thing as managers anymore? I mean, there are a few behemoth large organizations, but when you say VUCA is the new normal, and it really is more and more and more, I just think about some of these companies that I used to contract for, where it was just like the last bastions of management. What would you say to some of those companies that they're feeling the heat? They have deep pockets. They're going to be able to survive for maybe a few more years or even decades. But what do they really need to be doing with their mid-level and basic level managers to really infuse basic leadership skills, and as a culture in there?
Right. Well, there's a couple of things. So a friend of mine, uses this phrase, who's actually a CEO, says, leaders lay the tracks and managers keep the train on the tracks. So that's just a good analogy to think, okay, well, a leader is the one who's sort of the looking out, trying to figure out where do we even need a track? And then the managers, which may also be the leaders, are saying, okay, now let's keep it on the track. So that's just sort of that analogy. But as companies need to make the shift to the new normal, what the big thing they have to do now is empower the people closest to the work to make the decisions. That doesn't mean we don't need managers and leaders. What it means is that we need to make sure that we equip those people on the front lines to make the decision. So, for example, like we're seeing, Agile is really taking off in the tech world. And they actually have great concepts that I think should apply company-wide, which is let the people close to the work consult up to the decision makers and say, I might say, well, I want this piece of technology, and they might say, and I'm willing to pay $40,000, and they might say, well, great, but we can do it for 10. So, we need to empower them to be able to make good decisions. That's the first thing. We need to do training. Companies are not as good as training as the military, for example. So if you're in the military, if you're asked to do something, you get training, no matter what it is. Like you'll be in a flight simulator or however it is, you're going to be trained. And in corporate America, we are not as good at that. So we'll say, okay, you did a good job. We're going to put you in management. Good luck.
Good luck.
And by the way, all your friends, you can't really be friends with them anymore because you're one of us. Yeah. Right. So, that's not appropriate, right? We've got to train people. I always say, ask yourself what in their background would have taught them how to do this. And if the answer is nothing, then someone needs to teach them how to do it. So that's the piece we have to do for them. And then leaders, they set the vision, the strategy, the values, and then they check for alignment to make sure that the people that are empowered are aligned.
Well, we've been enjoying this talk with Bonnie Hagemann. Her talk is called Waiting for the Fog to Lift. And we're going to talk a little bit more about her talk. And we're going to pivot over at this time over to the Blitz Round. Hey, Talk Universe. I hope you've been enjoying today's episode with today's guest. But you know what? Many people want more than that. Many people that listen to Be the Talk actually want to give a talk. And if that's you, you're not alone. Listen to the rest of this podcast. At the end, I'll have a free resource for you just for listening. And it's time for the Blitz Round with Bonnie Hagemann. I'm going to ask her a series of either-or questions related to the preparation and performance of her recent talk. Bonnie, are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. Were you invited to speak or did you apply?
Well, that's a funny story. I was thinking about that. I was like, how did that happen? So I didn't apply. I did after the fact. But what happened was I travel all the time for my work, and I realized I had lived in Kansas City and didn't really have friends in Kansas City. So I told one of my consultants who invited me to a brunch, and there I met Alana Mueller, who runs Coffee Lunch Coffee. She's a great networker here in Kansas City. And because I met her there, she introduced me to the person who was Sherry Jacobs, who was running the TED Talk. And we ended up through a series of conversations. I was recommended. And then that's how we got started. And I did apply, but after the fact.
Yeah. Well, and utilize your network, Talk Universe.
Right,
I think that's
exactly.
that's the key.
Tell people what you need.
Yeah. Absolutely. So in terms of your preparation, are you a memorizer, improviser, or blender?
Well, I am learning new things. So at the time of the TED Talk, what I did was I did hire a TED Talk coach. I've been through many speaking coaches and trainings and all of that, but I hired one specifically for the TED Talk. He beat me up mercilessly. I mean, I really left thinking I hate him and I feel terrible. But he is the one who got the dad story out of me. And everyone talks about my dad's story.
Yeah, and that's the piece. I mean, here's the thing talking about. I'm taking a little bit of a sidestep armchair quarterback here, but I mean, it's great. We all have acronyms. We all have principles. We all want to lead with the principles. But what a good TED coach is going to do is pull the vulnerable story of farmer dad. Farmers don't cry, but this farmer cried, and Bonnie was right there. And that's the emotional. That's the piece that we remember, and that's the piece that really makes Bonnie's talk unique. It's, I've even, said no disrespect in any way to Bonnie. There are many talks about, war and confusion. And I've heard the VUCA acronym before, and I've heard some of these things before. And what makes it really extra special and unique is Bonnie's vulnerability to share this emotional story of her awesome father who the next morning wakes up with a plan. It's almost like something out of the A-Team. I remember that show. I love it when a plan comes together. That's the piece. Yes. That's the piece that none of us really want to do, to be that vulnerable, but that's the piece that really makes this a talk instead of a great workshop or keynote or presentation. Bonnie, next question. What's a tip, tool, or technique that helped you?
Well, I did memorize the talk because of the 17 minutes. Like, I often present in more of an academic format, which is, I have my slides, I have my research, and so getting all of that into a story form and making it into 17 minutes was, oh my gosh, that's really hard. Yeah. So I did memorize it. So practice, practice, practice.
What's your advice to other executives who are really top of their game? You're used to flying around, getting paid, doing, very well recompensed trainings and all of that. And then you get invited to give this talk, and then you find out they're really inviting you to put on an extra, 50, 60 hours of unpaid extra work of time that you don't have. And it's so tempting. It's got to be so tempting to just kind of do the same thing you do with everybody, just kind of pivot 10% and adjust it 10%. It doesn't work that way. We both know it. What's your advice to other people who are really top of their game to really put in that extra work? What gave you the motivation, and what's your advice for them?
Well, I give myself the same talk I give the leaders that I coach, which is bring your A game every day. And so an A game for a TED Talk is not just doing what I always do. It's really preparing. It's hiring the coach. It's spending the time. I remember that it was in 2016 when I gave the TED Talk, and that Christmas, right before Christmas, I spent 2 days of my time off that I had blocked getting coached.
Right before Christmas.
Right before Christmas.
Ho, ho, ho. Merry Christmas.
If you're going to be at the top of your game, you have to play like a professional.
Absolutely. Here's the cut for time question. What was the most painful part of your talk to cut out?
That I cut out. I think what was hard for me was shifting from the academia, sort of method of showing my research first. I think that's almost like a comfort area for me, is to start with, here's all the credible stuff behind what I'm going to say. And so to have to say it without building my credibility with the research first, that was a little scary.
Well, thank you for doing that, because whether you're in medicine or you're in academia, as I used to adjunct myself. So we want to, and it's almost like for a TED Talk, it's almost a hiding behind the data. It's one thing to say, hey, here's case study 1, 2, and 3. Here's what's a little intriguing about what they have in common, and here's how I changed in the process, and here's how you could change too and walk out of here. But it's a different format. So congratulations for you cutting out the piece that your research heavy firm is that's part of your A game. And so for you to start out with a personal story is absolutely huge as well. Bonnie, what is the most unexpected, strange, or just plain weird thing that happened during or right before your talk?
Well, that's a good question. What was the weirdest thing? I think one of the weirdest things was we were just sitting in the back, and I really, you know how they say you get a knot in your stomach and, you know, people say they're going to throw up. You know, I've only had that happen twice, and that was one of them. So
and you're jetting around, you're talking, you're accomplished public speaker.
There's only 100 people in that venue where we were. That was all the tickets that they sold. So it wasn't like there was a big crowd. I have spoke much bigger crowds. But what was going on was they were supposed to live stream ours. So ours was supposed to be one of the ones that was, you know, so that's what was getting me. I was like, oh, you know, who's watching? How many? Like, that was making me really nervous. Now, the technology didn't work. So but I didn't know it until after. So I wish I had known that before. That would have helped me.
Well, you realize we're live streaming right now, so no pressure or anything. But we don't have millions of people watching, unfortunately, because of the Facebook algorithm. But how much fun is this? We've been enjoying our Blitz round with Bonnie Hagemann. Her talk is called "Waiting for the Fog to Lift." Any leaders, any executives, any corporations that are going through the life cycle of corporations, they need to hear this talk. And you can connect with Bonnie. You can watch the talk on our website at BeTheTalk.com on our show notes page, as well as you can connect with her at executivedevelopment.com. Great domain name, executivedevelopment.com. We will also have a link on our show notes page to connect with Bonnie's firm, and keep your eyes out for this amazing research that's about to be published by her firm. That's going to be really great. I hope, you know, I hope I can at least get a little bit of a sneak peek, just because it's curious to me, being somewhat in that space as well. And we're going to be right back with Bonnie Hagemann in the final word of advice in just a moment. Hey, Talk Universe, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. And if you want to give the talk to change the world, but you don't know how or even where to start, no problem at all. Go to BeTheTalk.com/get accepted for my new 5-day email course that'll show you how. Absolutely free. Just go to BeTheTalk.com/get accepted. And we're back with Bonnie Hagemann. It is time for the final word of advice. What is it?
Okay. Well, can I give it to you?
Please do.
Okay. First of all, on the TED Talk is just, you know, get out there and like do the networking, find out who's running it, start making connections, you know, and get in front of the people who are building the TED Talk in your area. And then just in general for leadership, you know, people really do need leaders. So if you have any desire whatsoever, you know, you see a leadership gap, step in it.
Bonnie Hagemann, thank you so much for coming on the talk today, carving out time in your busy schedule, and sharing your wisdom with Talk Universe.
Thank you, Nathan.
Thanks for listening to Be the Talk. For tips and resources to help you change the world, go to BeTheTalk.com. See you tomorrow.